Well, if you read the Sunday Mail last weekend, you would have seen a very interesting article that spoke about the work of a man who's done a lot of work with Formula One racing car drivers, as well as elite athletes and sports and business leaders from right around the world. And I must admit, it's a subject that I'm fascinated in about how the human body works, but also how the mind works, and more or less how we can get the best from a business sense or from a sports performance sense by how we train our brain. My next guest knows all about that. He's had an incredible career looking at working with a number of Formula One teams, just to name one of the things that he's done. And he's written a fantastic book called The Winner's Bible. And I'm very pleased to say that joining us is Dr Kerry Spackman. Good morning, Kerry.
Good morning, Russell. I hope it's nice and sunny over there in Brisbane for you.
It's probably a bit colder when you are in Auckland, I guess.
Absolutely. I don't know how you actually live in Brisbane because I'd never do any work. I just speak, I think.
It's the price of living in paradise, my friend.
It is.
Kerry, I was fascinated by the article that was in the paper the other day, and in looking a little bit more of your background, it's been a fascinating journey. Can you maybe share with us how you got to doing what you're doing now, and I guess also looking at the motorsport background that you've had in terms of working with some of the great Formula One teams?
Yes, I've been very lucky, and I started off originally as an applied mathematician and was lucky enough to win a senior prize here in Auckland University in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
Ended up developing some electronics to measure the performance of cars, which I teamed up with an old professor who came from NASA.
Oh.
We developed this equipment, went over to America and showed it off to various car companies, including Ford Motor Company at their world headquarters.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, Jackie Stewart, or now Sir Jackie Stewart, was there testing some of these experimental prototype cars. He looked at what I had developed and told Ford they ought to really buy this piece of equipment. And in the process, Jackie and I became friends, and we ended up working together to analyze Ford's professional test drivers to see if we could improve their performance.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody really seemed to know what would make a really top professional test driver, despite the fact that there's been an awful lot of effort put into these people over the years. So I then decided that because nobody knew, I would go and find out what went on inside a professional test driver's mind while they were controlling a car. Went and visited places like the RAF Farnborough, where they train their Top Gun pilots, and NASA and various other people. The end result, it still didn't really give much information, so I then decided to enroll in a PhD in neuroscience to see if we could actually work out what was going on in there and increase their performance. Was very lucky to be able to find some really interesting things, and then from there developed a really good course for Ford Motor Company. Jackie Stewart, of course, then set up his team Stewart Grand Prix,
Mm-hmm.
which then became Jaguar Racing. I followed him into the Formula One area, working with telemetry and obviously with the drivers by now, because I'd worked out what went on inside a driver's brain. And then from there through to various other teams I've worked with, including McLaren, Red Bull, and various other teams.
When it comes to Formula One drivers, and you talk about this in your book, where we look at elite athletes having to perform at a level far beyond what they would have experienced, say, at club level or in those learning phases of their career. What are some of those core principles that I guess not just apply to Formula One, but might also apply to business and how people live their lives as well? What are some of those things that make people, those elite athletes, so different to you and I or the average earthling?
Yes, okay. I think the first thing is that at the very elite level, it is very, very tough. And I think the average person, even the average competitive person, whether business person or sports person, doesn't really comprehend how sharp that very pinnacle really is. And these people absolutely are on the ragged edge of performance all the time. And it's not so much that they can just pull out one good result from time to time. What really separates the champion is that they're able to do this consistently day in and day out, week in and week out, year in and year out. So the question then is, what is it that allows these people to become so great? The first thing I think for me is obviously work ethic.
Yeah.
I don't know any of these top people that don't actually work very hard. And if I talk in motor racing terms, if we take Michael Schumacher, he was one of the hardest working people in Formula One I've ever come across. He would do the practice and qualifying and then the race on the weekend, and that's a pretty grueling schedule, to be honest with you. But then Monday morning, he's the first person at the test track back at in Ferrari testing a new component. Now, he didn't need to do that. Ferrari have very good test drivers, but his work ethic was that he had to be there and to do all that. And by the way, after he's probably done 100 laps around the Formula One track, he'll probably do a 2-hour ride on his bicycle in the gym, and it'll be at a level that would embarrass plenty of triathletes. So hard work is number one. Number two is relentless attention to detail, and this is something I can't stress enough. All the champions I've come across have this ever-present need to constantly refine their performance. So Schumacher, again, if you looked at his early career, he wasn't the greatest ever motor racing driver when he started off, but every single year he improved. Every single race he learned something. And so it's this ability to find out what he's doing, divide it into smaller pieces, analyze it, and gradually increase each of the components that make up his performance. There's no big gains. They're all little things that add up. And this is the same with Tiger Woods. If you look at how he's worked incredibly hard. He's one of the hardest working guys on the tour. But he's also the guy that is constantly adjusting and analyzing his game. So this attention to detail and this work ethic are absolutely crucial. And it's at a much higher level than almost everybody realizes. And then I think the last thing is really an unshakable belief in themselves. Everybody will have trouble. Everyone will have a bad day. Everyone will have disappointments. And sometimes the world is absolutely against you. But, again, you take Schumacher when he went to Ferrari. Ferrari was at the back of the grid when he first turned up. It was in a complete mess. And yet he had this belief in himself that he carried through his team, that he built this team around him. And, of course, the rest is history, 7 world titles.
And, Kerry, it's an interesting, and for those people just joining us, my special guest this morning is Dr Kerry Spackman, who's the author of The Winner's Bible. Kerry, I think the thing that is fascinating about it, and you touched on that with Schumacher, and probably guys like Niki Lauda were very similar, and when they went to places like Ferrari, they not only brought a level of expertise and a level of passion from a driving perspective, but they could also seem to galvanise the whole team around them. Do you think is that another key trait as well, being able to pass that passion on to the people around you?
Absolutely. And I won't mention any names, but one of the Formula One drivers I worked with some time ago was a very, very talented driver and was able to win races very, very well. The problem was this particular driver didn't galvanize the team around him. And that was a real impediment. And part of the problem was, if something went wrong, it was always the team's fault, somebody else's fault. And I said, actually, you are the captain of the ship. You are the captain, and you are responsible for everything. So actually, these mechanics, in the old days, they used to change engines through the night and do everything like that. These people are working incredibly hard for you. How about one day you just, get alongside one of them and show a personal interest in them as the captain? How's your day? How's your wife? Et cetera, et cetera. And suddenly, when he did this, the mechanic's chest puffed out a couple of extra inches. The mood in the pits went up a couple of notches, and suddenly reliability issues went down, and the car was just that little bit sweeter handling. Now, these mechanics were incredibly motivated and devoted to the team. However, a little extra bit of galvanizing them and getting that passion across, and all being part of a winning team, is crucial. And as you say, Lauda, Schumacher, all the greats. There was a great story, which is true, of when Nigel Mansell came back after he'd been away from a team. And he walked into one of the teams and he said, "I'm back. We're going to win." And the whole team just changed, Mansell's back. And the word went around, Mansell's back, the world champion, the champion's back. We're off.
And do you think, from a business point of view, because and this is one of the things that fascinates me, I love sort of looking at that, from my own perspective, from a business sense, but do you think a lot of employers, in companies maybe make those same mistakes, that they don't sort of spend enough time trying to build that morale and build that team mentality around them?
Absolutely. Yeah. And often the bigger the company, the more they will focus on clinical measures of performance, which is good. You need to have those analytical measures of performance. But actually, if a team is passionate, if I'm going at home at night and I'm sitting in the bath and while I'm scrubbing my back, I suddenly think of something to help the company go forward. That's what makes a company truly great. And that only comes from being really genuinely passionate in what you're doing, enjoying what you're doing, because otherwise, if I don't enjoy it, I'll go home and I'll switch off and I'll do something else. It's this passion that permeates your life. is what makes the difference at the elite level.
Do you, again, look, this might be hard to pin down from what makes a Formula One driver sort of tick, but what sort of preparation, and I've often wondered this, what sort of preparation goes on, as they're putting the helmet on and they're getting into the cars? Do they all have a different approach, or do they all sort of do things roughly the same way? I know some drivers, when they put the helmet on, that was it. There was nothing else going through their head, and others were quite different. What's your thoughts on that, as far as how they prepare for a Grand Prix race?
Yes, every driver is a unique individual, and so some people it's about controlling their emotions, it's about becoming steady, it's about being laser focused and clinical. Other people, it's about organizing their thoughts. They're all very, very different, just because every human being is very different, and so I don't think there is one way forward. However, I think what is crucial is that all the preparation is done at an incredible level of detail long before that helmet goes on, so that you have confidence that there's nothing more you need to do when that helmet goes on. And I think that's the key. So again, the champion does their homework very well, to the point that there's just nothing left to do when you put that helmet on. You know the thought processes you're going to have, you know the order you're going to go through them, you've analyzed everything in detail, you're now able to get in the zone, as it were, switch off, and go into that automatic mode, because everything's already been done. That would be the common theme.
In your book, and unfortunately we're nearly out of time, but in your book you talk about sport and the things that have happened already to get someone to that point, their dietary knowledge, their exercise physiology, their biomechanics. That stuff's pretty much well known. Do you see this work with neuroscience as being the next sort of big frontier?
Very good question. The answer is absolutely yes. If you look at an athlete from 30 years ago, how they prepare physically is vastly improved. Their knowledge of diet, physiology, biomechanics, all those things are massively improved. But one thing that hasn't really changed is their mental preparation. And that's really quite sad, because at the same time, our knowledge of the brain has probably advanced more than any other time in the history of mankind. So it's just that what we've learnt about the brain and how it works has been slow to be put into action for the average sports person. Now that's changing, and that is the big new frontier.
Again, it's been a fascinating conversation, Kerry. I've really enjoyed it, and it's something I hope we can sort of foster some more discussion with our listeners. And again, my special guest was Dr Kerry Spackman. He's the author of The Winner's Bible. Kerry, is there a website that people can visit, or how could they get copies of your book? Yes,
www.winnersbible.com. It's simple as that. Or you can just Google me, Kerry Spackman. You'll find an awful lot about that, and it's available on all bookstores. In fact, it's has been a #1 bestseller in New Zealand, broke all records, and I believe we're selling quite a few in Australia as well now, so we're lucky.
Well, mate, I'm about halfway through, but I'm absolutely loving it, so I can't recommend it highly enough. But Dr Kerry Spackman, thank you so much for your time, and look forward to speaking again shortly.
Russell, been a real pleasure. Bye now.
Take care, mate.